And welcome everyone to the Seattle Southside Chamber's Burien District Committee Roundtable today. We are talking about public safety. Many of you probably attended our event in April, and from that experience, our takeaway was that we wanted to expand that work and try to meet more regularly. So this committee will convene at least quarterly. So please stay connected to the chamber for more information on future meetings and convenings and how you can be involved and continue to support and contribute to our work. And again, appreciate you being here. We're grateful that Chief Ted Bowe with the Burien Police Department is here with us tonight, as well as Burien Fire Chief Mike Mars. My name is Andrea Ray, and on behalf of the Chamber, our staff, and our board, thank you for making time to be with us here tonight. Scott Schaefer, our Vice President of the Burien District on our board, is also in attendance here tonight, and he is recording the meeting so that those members who aren't able to join live can still watch and view the information later at their convenience. This is a Zoom meeting, which is different than our April event, which was a Zoom webinar. We hope that the meeting format will allow for more engagement and flexibility. Again, along with that, I have a couple housekeeping items, which of course is that everyone deserves respect, and that means that we treat each other with kindness and respect. Please don't talk over each other or do anything that would prevent someone from hearing what someone else has to say when they're speaking. You can raise your hand and I can call on you, and you can unmute yourself and ask your question or share your comment live in person. If you don't feel comfortable doing that in person, you can go ahead and send that in the chat to me, and then I can relay that to the group as well. So really appreciate it again that you're here. We don't have time with as many people that are here within our virtual room to do, around the table in person and introduce ourselves. But I would really appreciate it if you would go ahead and type your name into the chat and maybe, what your business is and where your business is located, whether that be Burien or a White Center. It would be just nice to know who is here with us. Again, if you have any technical difficulties, feel free to just send me a message from the chat, and I'll do my best to try to help support you. The agenda tonight is pretty simple. We're going to hear first from Burien Police Chief Ted Bowe on what's happening with the latest crime trends and updates. We'll then be able to do Q&A directly for Burien Police Chief Ted Bowe. Next, we will hear from Burien Fire Chief Mike Mars. Obviously, with our record heat wave we just experienced and the 4th of July holiday coming up, fire safety is public safety and paramount. And as someone who has almost set their house on fire twice, I can say I am also very grateful that Chief Mars is here today just to give us all a refresher course on fire safety. And again, the Chamber is just thrilled to be able to host this opportunity for our community to connect, to learn, and engage. The issues facing our community are not unique to us. As an independent nonprofit dedicated to economic development and community engagement, serving our community for generations, we have always believed very strongly in our power to come together to find solutions to all the complex issues our community faces. We were founded on the belief that we are stronger together. We hear and see the concerns of our community, and we stand in solidarity together to find those solutions. Public safety is economic development, and it's a team sport. And man, are we glad that you are on our team. So thank you again for being here. And with that, I will turn it over to our first speaker, Burien Police Chief Ted Bowe. Take it away.
There we go. That's 7 years of advanced education works right there. How to push the right button. Good evening. Thank you for having me. And a special shout out to Andrea and the work of the Chamber. They do an amazing job in bringing these events to you. We've done one that was crime prevention focus and various crime prevention techniques that you can use both as a business and at home to reduce your likelihood of being a victim of a crime. And then our most recent one was kind of an overview of the Burien Police Department and really some of the collaborative partnerships we have with our lead partners, law enforcement assisted diversion, and how they can better serve the business community, engage with the business community. So it was this is the third one talking about this collective work of public safety. So thank you again, Andrea, for stepping out and getting these organized. So a little bit about me. My name is Ted Bowe. I've been your police chief here for just over 3 years now. I am married to an elementary school librarian, so I get corrected on my writing all the time, and I'm sure there's a spelling error in here she will find and point out to me. I am a father of 2 daughters. I have an 11-year-old named Harley and an 8-year-old named Amelia. Grew up in Wisconsin, moved to South King County when I was in middle school and graduated from Federal High School. I made the natural progression to the University of Washington, the best university in the state. And that was for you, City Manager Wilson. And enjoyed 4 lovely years in undergrad at the University of Washington, where I got a business administration degree. I later went on and got a master's degree from the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California. I've been a police officer for a little bit over 21 years now. And really my specialties are in designing, programming, training, community policing, and complex investigations. And I can go through my whole resume, but that's probably a pretty quick overview. That'll get you to the main points. A little bit about your Burien Police Department. We are a contract with the King County Sheriff's Office for our police services. The City of Burien contracts for 43 police officers that serve your community. While the officers are employees of the King County Sheriff's Office, they're dedicated to the City of Burien, and they sign a contract to serve the City of Burien for a period of time, which is a minimum of 2 years. So many of our officers serve the city much longer than 2 years. We focus on 3 main areas under my time here, and that's building trust. How do we build trust with our community? And I believe trust is something that's built on every call, every customer, every time. It's how you deal with your customers. And I know I'm talking to a lot of business people right now. You know the impact of a negative customer service event and how it ripples throughout your reputation. And the same is true in law enforcement. A negative event ripples through our reputation, and therefore, every call, we're responsible for not only ourselves, but also how we treat our profession. Andrea already took my words, team sport. She stole them from me. She's listened to too many of my presentations, but I do believe that law enforcement and public safety are a team event. All too often, we think of public safety as a police-centric or a police-only thing, as opposed to a collective thing that we all have a role and a responsibility in. And that's one of my things that I really believe in Burien is we have to look at this as a collective and something bigger than just the cops will solve all your problems. And the third thing is supporting each other, which is really my belief that there's a way we have to treat our employees that builds the employee and will help the employee deliver that amazing service to build trust and fight crime in the community. And a lot of that has to do with providing them the resources, training, direction, and support that they need to be at their best. Your Burien Police Department is broke down into some main groups here. First one is your patrol. Those are the men and women that are driving the police cars that when you call 911 typically show up in a marked police car wearing a uniform. There's 26 officers assigned to patrol, 3 sergeants assigned to patrol. And then we have 3 detective units. One is called SET, or Special Emphasis Team, and they focus on complex investigations. They typically work undercover, and they're really focused on gun and violent crimes. So that's kind of their focal area. A lot of their work also will connect to narcotics, because a lot of gun and violent crimes are intertwined with narcotics, but their actual focus area is gun and violent crimes. CID is your jack of all trades detective. So all cases that we don't route to King County major crimes units stay here at the precinct or stay here in the police department, and those are your jack of all trades for those cases. So those are largely misdemeanor and property crimes. And then the Burien Crime Reduction Unit, or B Crew, is a multidisciplinary team of detectives that really look at how do they coordinate approaches and solve problems across other spectrums. So how do we engage different people in solving complex crimes? And we also have one community service officer who really focuses on that link between police and the community, as well as crime prevention and program management. I always like to show this data just to give people a little bit of a reference point of where police in Burien and crime in Burien stands relative to other communities in South King County. This comes from the WASPIC Crimes in Washington report. All police agencies report on a very standardized metric, so we all report the exact same data to the state. The state then analyzes that data and produces the Crimes in Washington report. What I did for this was only pulled out communities immediately surrounding us in South King County, because a lot of times what people like to do is compare data to somebody who has a very different set of variables in their community than we have in our community. So as we look very localized to South King County, the first column there is crime rate per 1,000 residents, and that's your overall crime rate. And what we find is Burien and Des Moines are pretty much matched as the second lowest crime rate overall when set to the size of the overall population. Now, to be openly transparent, there's a lot of crime in our community, and there is crime, but it's in relativity, it is second lowest among South King County agencies. The next set of columns over there is the officers per 1,000. And here in Burien, you have about 1 officer per every 1,000 residents. And that's what we pay for as a police department. And then the third column is really kind of what I view as an efficiency number, which is how much does it cost to put your police department here per resident? And we are the lowest cost per resident of anybody in South King County. So I like to put those numbers out there just as a starting point for the discussion, that this is kind of where we sit in these 3 categories of our crime rate per person, how many officers you have per person, and what it costs per person to produce policing in the city of Burien. Some of this stuff I went over in the last one, and I see that there's some duplication in our audience, so I'm gonna go through this really quick. But the first thing here is a 5-year comparison of dispatched calls for service. So this is how many times people called 911 and asked for the police response or the police department to respond. And the comparison here, just for reference, is that over the last 5 years, our call load has been almost exactly stable. So it really overlaps pretty evenly as we look at the last 5 years. It's about 21,000 calls a year that your police department responds to in the city of Burien. Where are those calls? So this is a heat map of where our calls for service are. And our calls for service in Burien tend to really focus most heavily in the downtown core and then along the major travel corridors. So you'll see up through First Avenue and then along the Ambom corridors. That's where you tend to see the most dispatch calls for service or police calls for service. And again, this is people calling and saying they need the police to come help them with something. So that's the location of our primary calls. And calls are pretty consistent throughout the day from about 10 a.m. to midnight. So some days earlier, some days later, but normally by 10 a.m. the officers are humping pretty good to keep up with the dispatch calls for service, and that runs through about midnight before it starts to slow down. The diagram in the top left is the crimes against persons chart, and the one in the bottom right is the crimes against property chart. I know we talked about this. There's a little anomaly when you look at the crimes against property chart that catches your eye there, that huge spike. There's actually the Washington State unemployment fraud. That was the window when one of the crimes against property is fraud. And during the window when they had all the frauds on unemployment in the start of COVID, that hit everybody's numbers statewide. So there's a huge spike in that number statewide for everybody. So a little bit of quick current crime trends to bring you up to what's happened since our last meeting, since those were all retroactive pieces of information from our last meeting. What I did is had our crime analysis unit pull out the calls that we tend to get asked about the most. so you could see where they stood as far as relation to each other. So the first category is aggravated assault. Those are people assaulting another party. And it's more than just a simple assault. So that's where you're actually having some injury or more than just a complaint of pain. And what we see there is that they kind of peaked in April and have kind of been coming back down since April. Firearms violations also peaked in April and have come back down. This is any time that there's a firearm event in the community that includes both shooting events as well as possession events for which there was no discharge of the firearm. And the last category is robberies, which is taking something from somebody with the use of force. I will put a little caveat with this. By rule, a robbery includes when somebody shoplifts something, and then when the security or loss prevention stops them, they refuse to comply with loss prevention. That by rule is a robbery. So sometimes these are really shoplifting events, not somebody robbing you at gunpoint or the more dramatic version of that with which you might have in your head. So the next section here is your crimes against property. And this is from left to right: residential burglary, or I'm sorry, commercial burglaries, residential burglaries, gang graffiti. Larceny is defined as all auto parts, is that first one. The second one is theft from an auto, and the third one is the theft of a vehicle. So the theft of the auto parts one tends to be largely linked to the catalytic converter thefts. So people sawing off your catalytic converter and selling it for the precious metals. And on the burglary category to the left, you'll see we're actually seeing a downward trend in burglaries. Again, you'll notice April is a spike for a lot of this stuff, and then it's kind of petered off since April. It's actually fairly unusual. Normally you see crimes rising going into the summer. So it's fairly unusual actually to see a reducing crime pattern going into summer. Another trend we are seeing is the regional gun violence trend. This has been fairly publicized on the media, but just something to talk about. I was in a meeting today, and Seattle Police Department, as of today, is reporting a 42% increase in shootings this year versus last year, a 93% increase in drive-by shootings. King County Sheriff's Office as a whole, and remembering as a contract partner, we share with the King County for major crimes investigation and homicide investigation. They have investigated 10 homicides in the last 30 days and 17 homicides in 2021. The previous high was set last year at 24 homicides for the year, and we have 17 through half a year. So that trend appears to be also heading towards a high. And I want to talk a little bit about what's going on in this work as well. Some of this is Burien and some of this is regional. But when we look at what works with intervention with gun violence, some of it is about prevention. How do we engage our community? Our schools have a responsibility. Sports programs keep kids out of trouble. How do we make sure people have opportunities, education, and then stabilizing some of those base needs? Rent, food, housing. Some of the base needs will actually prevent the attractiveness to the gang lifestyle or the style where the environment in which violent crimes occur. This is also where you would find things like gun locks, gun prevention, that kind of stuff is in this preventative category. The next category we look at is intervention. What do we do once somebody's engaged in violence? How do we get them out of that? And these are these restorative practices. How do we bring people back to mainstream society? A lot of these are also community-led solutions, normally mixed with incarceration or police action. So a lot of times there's a police action, a criminal charge, and then a return to the community to try to solve the problem so that we don't have a young person caught in the cycle forever. These are programs like Leadership, Intervention, and Change, which is a partnership with the YMCA Social Impact Center. I'm fortunate enough to be the chair on the committee, the steering committee for Leadership, Intervention, and Change, or the LINK steering committee. We also have organizations like Choose 180 and Community Passageways that do a lot of referral work from the court system and a lot of intervention work as well in our community before people are systems involved. And then the third piece we look at in gun violence is this idea of suppression and coordinated suppression, which is really where your police are doing a enforcement effort and trying to identify who are the key people who are involved in the violence and hold them criminally accountable for the violence. So these are really these regional approaches. And I mentioned I was looking at the Seattle data here. We actually had a meeting today where all the police chiefs from South County and Seattle, as well as some of our federal partners, were talking about what's going on, what's the data saying, and how can we work together to coordinate some response to that. So very much so a regional response to gun violence. We also look a lot at homelessness. It's one of the challenges in our profession right now that a lot of times people look to law enforcement to solve, and it's not something law enforcement can solve, certainly not on their own. Here in Burien, we have an approach called Leading with Services. And really what it is a partnership between police and human services where Carlene Branch-Luter, who's the human services manager, and I sit down and try to coordinate our response to stuff and our approach to a problem. So we try to look at it through both lenses, like what is the police component of this and what's the service component with this? And how do we make sure that we're giving service options before we resort to criminal justice options? So giving people an opportunity to do something other than going down that criminal justice road in dealing with homelessness in our community. We do have a list of tools there that I can read through, but the biggest takeaway from that list of tools is that we actually have quite a few tools available to us, and nobody has every tool you could ever need, but we're always looking for more areas to build out the spectrum of services that help us deal with homelessness in our community. A lot of these programs on the left are funded by the county. Like we talked about LEAD last time. LEAD is about a $2 million biannual investment in the city of Burien by King County with the Mental Illness Drug Dependency, or MID funds, that are supporting that program in Burien. So it's not a city funded program, but rather it's the county looking at the regional nature of this problem and investing in Burien to find solutions. Couple things in current world for law enforcement. This was a very active legislative session. And during this legislative session, there was somewhere in the vicinity of 100 different bills related to public safety in the more global sense, but some are rather large in how they impact law enforcement actions in our community. And I'm just going to touch a couple of these. And I want to make clear, this nothing I say is a statement about whether they're right or whether they're wrong. It's merely just things that we're going to have to learn a different way of doing some of our business. And that takes a little bit of challenge and culture change to learn to play the game by a new set of rules, so to speak. So the first one is House Bill 1310, which really is focused on police use of force. And what this bill did was it looked at when police are authorized to use any physical force. So when are we essentially able to use coercion to accomplish a task? And what they said was, if you don't have probable cause for a crime, or a misspelled word, imminent threat, there's the part where my wife catches me, then you have to look at that from a law enforcement officer and decide whether or not the most appropriate action is to walk away or to take no police action. Where this presents a challenge, and where we're really working on interpreting, is often in law enforcement, we're dealing with stuff where we're investigating it, but we haven't yet identified the probable cause. We're in an investigative phase. This bill took away that tool from law enforcement. So we know a bank was robbed. We know a person matches the description of the bank robbery, but we won't have the legal authority to detain that person in the immediate response, but rather we'll have to investigate it before we can make a detention, which may delay the detention or make it improbable or impractical to identify the person who perpetrated the crime. So there's some challenges in just learning a new set of rules here. It also will impact our response to behavioral health crisis, because now we often help fire, ambulances do involuntary commitments for mental health evaluations, and all of those things don't fall in one of those top two categories, which means police can't coerce you into an ambulance. We can't facilitate that forced response to the mental health system, which currently is a role that falls on law enforcement that no longer will, unless you're an imminent threat. And to be clear, imminent means right now, not somewhere in the future, not it's uncomfortable, and I think it's an escalating series of behaviors. It's somebody is actively going to be hurt or assaulted at this exact moment in time. So there's some concern about how that's going to be applied. The next piece of this is the Blake fix. I believe at the last meeting I talked about Blake, but Blake is a Supreme Court decision that said the drug law in the state of Washington is unconstitutional, and we can't enforce it. So it essentially made it legal to possess and use all narcotics in the state of Washington. The legislation called the Blake fix, or Senate Bill 5476, again made possession a misdemeanor as opposed to a felony. But it put a piece in there that said, although it's a misdemeanor, police can't take you to jail for it. They merely can put you into a diversion program for drug charges. So in the city of Burien, we're super fortunate to have our partners in the law enforcement assisted diversion program, because that is going to be the mandatory option for law enforcement, is that they can only divert you into a lead program. They can't take you to jail any longer for at least 2 violations. So the first 2 violations must be deferred. And then diversion is optional after the first 2 violations, but heavily encouraged both at the law enforcement level as well as at the court level for a prosecution diversion. The next bill is House Bill 1054, which relates to tactics. And we're fortunate in King County in that we actually were compliant with the vast majority of the tactics discussions already. There are a couple that will change a little bit, in that functionally the bill made pursuits something that will very rarely occur. So should somebody flee from law enforcement, there are very few situations for which law enforcement will give chase to a vehicle that flees. And that includes when people have committed crimes. So if you've committed a crime and we know who you are, we have to triage that and find a different way or another time to catch up with you, but rather to let you go for the day without pursuing you. And then there is a discussion going on right now with whether or not the intent was or was not to reduce less lethal options, but they set a limit on the caliber size of projectile device that you can use, which included 12 gauge shotguns, which is actually the platform that we use for beanbags or less lethal rounds for sometimes dealing with somebody who maybe is armed with a knife. We may be able to get them disarmed with the knife using what's called a beanbag round. It's not actually a beanbag, but it's a less lethal projectile. And there's some discussion whether or not that was the intent, but the way the law is written, it appears to prohibit law enforcement from possessing less lethal alternatives like that shotgun. And all of this comes down to, what if you violate any of the rules? The answer is we are all certified by the state. In order to be a police officer in the state of Washington, you have to possess state certification. And if we don't comply with these rules as they're set forward, our commission can be investigated by the Criminal Justice Training Commission, CJTC, and they can remove the officer's commission, even if the police agency decides not to take action. So they essentially created an oversight board through the commission to review officer actions and conduct anywhere in the state. So what's on deck? The amount of legislation that came through is massive, and there's a whole bunch of policy and procedure adjustment and training and implementation that any of these bills in and of themselves would have been a big lift, but all of them together just gives us a lot of work to do in a very short period of time. We have 90 days from the time the bills were signed, which means July 25th is the implementation day for all of these bills. So we're currently in the process of rewriting a bunch of manual and training, and then all of the place where police overlaps. Chief Mars is going to be on in a minute, and he and I talked about, well, how does this impact when police and fire go to a call together, and where's our role and where's their role, and does this change any of those relationships? Back to the Chief Mars, but because I'm the one who has to write the tickets for it, it has been so hot and so dry. Fireworks are illegal in the city. It is the busiest day of the year for your police and fire resources, and to add in chasing around fireworks is one more thing that is often difficult to get to in the day being as busy as it is. So the more we can push out there that fireworks are illegal and we appreciate compliance, the better off we are. We do have the ability and willingness to write $500 tickets for it. And that includes to the both the person lighting off the fireworks as well as the property owner for which the fireworks are being lit. So allowing people to light fireworks on your property is no longer an acceptable behavior, and you can be held liable as the property owner. Public safety. So our council asked us to come to them with some options for public safety programs that they could consider for the city to enhance public safety. And right now we're working with the city manager, the human services manager, the economic development manager, and we're brainstorming what are these different options that really make a lot of sense, where we can combine and view public safety as police and fire and mental health services, and how can we come together to fill some of the gaps in our system and create better systems. And the other thing is COVID is kind of coming to an end from the restrictions on law enforcement and community engagement. So we have a whole bunch of community engagement programs that will be getting fired up here. If they haven't already, they will within the next couple months. Bicycle rodeos, student-led training is a partnership with the Highline School District. The Police Explorers use the youth program. We're back at the community events downtown. Our first one back was the Father's Day car show. But the series of community events will be out again. Neighborhood Watch program is always been active, but we can start doing our meetings with the Neighborhood Watch captains. National Night Out is in August, and Teen Camp and Community Police Academy will be right around the corner as we build those back out. And with that, I think I stayed right at my 20-minute time limit. I hope I did, and I am available for any questions on any topic, what we presented or otherwise.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Chief Bo. And again, I'll just remind everyone, if you could please raise your hand and I can call on you. Or if you prefer, you can type your question into the chat. And maybe while people are getting going here and thinking about their questions, I'll ask one question that came up when we posted this event on our Facebook page, was this idea of public safety and inclement weather. And we do obviously warming shelters when it's snowing. And I think we're all just still trying to wrap our head around, oh my gosh, inclement weather could also be, it's too hot outside. How does the police department, and certainly Chief Mars, feel free to, chime in, handle, these inclement weather situations, and how can we as a community, better pool our resources or coordinate to, be responsive to those situations?
And I think this is where that team sport component comes in. So yesterday we all were working through the extreme weather shelter and building that under the guidance of our city manager. I think he's on here, Brian Wilson. We had 3 hot weather shelters: the police station, the library or town hall building, and then the community center, all opened yesterday afternoon. And we coordinated to have staff there as well as to have water. And it was a cool place with internet to get out of the weather. I think we kind of built the model for the first time. It's not 112 degrees in Burien very often. And that was something we all learned through in this last event. And we certainly will set them up again in the future. We also set them up today, but today we only set up one, recognizing I believe we had about 25, 30 people who used them. So we scoped it down to one facility today, also knowing that it was substantially cooler today. But yeah, absolutely. Extreme weather can hit all ends of the spectrum. And I think we worked through it as best we could on short notice, but I think we got her figured out.
Appreciate that. Yeah, it's definitely building the plane while it's in the air, right? It's a challenge.
I heard it was a 100-year event, so we have 99 years to fine tune the plans.
Man, I really hope so. Linda Akey, you have your hand raised. Go ahead and unmute yourself and ask a question.
Thank you. So I just had a couple of questions on the presentation. And first of all, I really appreciate everything that the Burien Police Department does. And I'm impressed with the kinds of activities that the department does. So I think that you have a really good solid community policing activities that go on that I think is great. I had a couple of questions that I was confused about. I had initially heard that there were 3 officers in the day and 4 officers at night or something like that. Is that just in the downtown core? And then my next question was, you had 43 officers listed initially that you spoke about, but in the presentation slide, you had 52 officers. Is that because you're down a number of officers, or what causes that? And then my final question was centered around the drug crimes. Is there a amount of drugs that you can have in possession? For instance, if it's a drug dealer with a lot of drugs that is dealing drugs, is that possession to that person, or is it just possession enough for them to get high, or what constitutes that possession?
Okay, so I'll take them in order. So the first part is the 3 versus 4 officers. So there's 26 officers assigned to patrol in Burien. If you back out the officers' training time and their days off, you actually have about 13 officers a day that are available to deploy in Burien, and then they work varied shifts. So we have what's called a minimum staffing level, which is 3 officers from midnight until 8 a.m. And then my screen just did something weird. And then from 8 a.m. until midnight, it's a 4 officer minimum. So typically speaking, we'll have a little bit more than that if everybody's at work. But if that is the minimum staffing level that we operate at. To be transparent, staffing is a challenge for everybody right now, including the sheriff's office. And while we contract for 43 officers, we currently have 38. So they are unable currently to fill all those positions. They have a plan to rectify that in the near future, but because of that, we are typically at those minimum staffing levels at all times right now. The next question is the 52 versus 43. So this is fancy contract math. You pay for exactly what you use on the King County Sheriff's Office. So 52 officers includes all the pieces of detectives and other staff in the training unit, et cetera, that we pay for a portion of. So we might pay for 1/6 of a firearms instructor and 5.2 major crimes detectives and 1.4 special assault detectives. That other 9 bodies is those collective parts and pieces of other detectives that we contract for. So we direct contract 43, and then our portion of the shared pool is those other 9 positions. And the last question was drug laws and quantities. So when they made drugs illegal, there is clearly possession limits versus what's a distribution, which is still illegal on a different front and has actually always been illegal. It does require fairly large quantities for distribution, more than, it's not a super small amount, I guess is what I'm saying. It's a noticeable quantity, far more than personal use before it's going to be a distribution case. There also is different types of dealers, to be transparent. There are people who deal for substance where they may have 3 bags of heroin and they sell one of them to you and sell one of them to that guy and keep the 3rd one. And they're funding their habit with small volume sales. And then there's people who are bringing 0.5 pounds of heroin into a community. And those are viewed very differently as far as the, both from the police lens as well as from the prosecution and the court lens. And the violence component, when I talked about those set detectives that are often tied into drugs, sometimes it's tied into that guns and violence, that tends to be those large level dealers that are bringing in large volumes of drugs that are protecting that particular behavior.
Just a quick,
oh, sorry, I was just going to say, it looks like you have a follow-up, Linda, and then I have a question in the chat when you're done.
okay, yeah, just a quick follow-up. So in the Burien Town Square Park, pretty much most every day, or at least several times a week, we witness drug dealing going on. Sometimes it goes in waves. I don't know if there's particular police activity that is occurring with that, But some of these drug deals are happening during the day or in the early evening, when children and people walking their dogs and stuff are out and about, literally occurring within 20 feet of children. Are these kinds of concerns that anything can be done about, or are these not kinds of calls that anything can really be done about?
Well, something can be done about anything. I never say we can't do anything about anything, which maybe gets me in trouble because I offer too much. But the reality is, sometimes the tool is not the traditional criminal justice response to some things, where it's not going to be an instant arrest. As we look back to that whole discussion about the new legislation and probable cause, I have to have probable cause that you're actively committing a crime in the moment for which I view you in order to make a detention or to use any physical force, which is going to present a challenge because most drug cases start in an investigative phase. So you call me and say, I observed something suspicious. That's going to be in an investigative phase. Most people are going to walk away from us and choose not to participate in that investigation if they're actively dealing drugs. We don't have the ability, unless we already have established probable cause, to make the arrest, which is going to require us to do much more complex investigations on those, involving informants and undercover officers, in order to get the probable cause established before the investigation, as far as the investigative detention is concerned. So to answer your question, the answer is yes and no. The other side of that is, this is really where helping with our partners who are non-law enforcement is really valuable to us, because a lot of the people you're seeing down there are dealing for substance level. They're not large scale drug dealers, but rather people who have addictive issues themselves. And that's where we start looking at how do we modify and correct behavioral health. And this is where our partners in LEAD, our partners in Catholic Community Services, our partners at NAVOS, they're all part of this solution in how do we get that person not addicted to the drugs, which would also prevent them from being in that environment. So we also do a lot of, and about once a month, you'll see a case on social media that is a larger level case, often involving narcotics and firearms, and our really cool puppy that loves to take pictures out there of finding narcotics and firearms. And that's that work of that investigative, the emphasis team or special emphasis team, which is really disrupting those large scale criminal enterprises that are using force and coercion to protect their marketplace. And that's their work, is interrupting those supply chains.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Linda. Appreciate it. Question in the chat is, again, so excited that National Night Out is coming back. What can we do to support National Night Out? How can people get involved?
So communities can host an event, and I have to put in the chat a little bit later Michiko Wilson's contact information, who's our community service officer. But you coordinate a picnic in your neighborhood. It's your picnic and your event. And then you register that event and say, I want a fire truck and a police car to come share in my event. And throughout the evening, Chief Mars and I will coordinate to make sure people stop by and you can ask questions or chat or just feed us marvelous food. I prefer barbecued ribs, but I'm not a picky. But really, it's about you getting together with your neighbors and creating that neighborhood relationship. And then we come to be part of that. So that's how it looks on the ground. And we will provide you all the information about how to get a hold of Michiko and how to register your National Night Out event. And yeah, I'll get that in the chat after Mike gets talking, and I can pull it up online.
Are there other ways that we can help the police? Thank you so much for that question. I know I reached out to you, Chief Bo, with the increase in crime. You mentioned, 10 homicides in, 30 days, and same thing from the business community, right? How can we help support our police officers? Are there things that we as community members or the business community, can do to help support you and your team, your officers?
Yeah, there's always stuff people can do to help support. I think a lot of it is about working together and understanding that these issues need collaborative solutions. Meetings like this and engaging in the discussion and really learning about the complexities of a lot of these issues is, I think, very important for community members. I think all too often people think if you push the easy button by calling 911 and then everything goes away and the problem is solved in moments, is just not, it is not a reality. So I do know that the officers right now on the street it's been a long, difficult period for your police officers, not just in Burien, but really nationally, police officers have had a very rough year. And knowing that people still do support and appreciate their time and their service is something that's important to them. So if I could say anything, it always resonates with me when somebody comes up to me while I'm getting a cup of coffee at Starbucks and says thanks or just acknowledges us. It's one of those little things that means the world to the men and women who are out there doing the job, is just that little acknowledgement. I think that's one of the best things you can do for people, is just make sure they know they're appreciated by their community.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Chief Bo. We thank you. We appreciate you so very much. Really, really appreciate it. And again, as you mentioned, we will be going to in-person meetings. So maybe at our next quarterly district roundtable, we can have those ribs. So it'll be good to be in person. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce Burien Fire Chief Mike Mars. I mentioned how I almost set my house on fire twice. Once was a barbecue and once was a dryer. And I will also thank Mr. Will Henriquez, who is also on this call, because he taught both of my kids how important it is when you see fire or smell smoke to call 911. Because I was telling my kids, mommy's got this, it's fine, everybody calm down. And my kids are like, calling 911. And it was great. We really appreciate our fire department and looking forward to learning a little bit more about fire safety. So Chief Mike Mars, over to you.
All right, thank you very much for having me here tonight. Excuse me. I'm Mike Mars, Fire Chief for King County Fire District 2. And that King County Fire District 2 serves North Highline, unincorporated North Highline, City of Burien, and City of Normandy Park. So we've got a fairly large response area. We do that out of 4 stations, and we have about 75 firefighters. And much like Ted's math, that gets a little squishy sometimes. We don't have 75 people every day. They're spread out over 3 shifts that work 24-hour shifts. So we have A, B, C shifts. They rotate through on a schedule. On any given day, we have minimum staffing of 15, and that gets us 4 engine companies, an aid car, and a battalion chief. And then Monday through Friday are what we call the day staff. We have training officers, we have assistant chiefs, we have fire marshals, we have fire code inspectors, investigators, and those kind of things. And then we, because of COVID, our numbers kind of dropped, but we also usually have about 15 volunteer firefighters. And that's where I started my career 30 years ago, was being a volunteer here in Burien with King County District 2. So yeah, a little bit about my background. So I've been with the fire department here for 30 years, married, have 2 kids like Ted. Mine are much older because I also have 2 grandkids and another grandkid on the way. So I'm going to have 3 granddaughters by November. So very proud of them. A couple things I want to talk tonight, certainly 4th of July, and also the extreme heat. And maybe then we'll touch COVID a little bit also. Try to stay, I don't have a fancy slide deck like Ted did, but Scott Schaefer, I was talking to him right before the meeting, and he said he appreciated my quote, and I said I was going to use it again tonight. It is the driest 4th of July in my 30 years with the fire department. And I've worked almost every 4th of July for the last 30 years here, starting out as a volunteer, because 4th of July for us is an all hands on deck. All of the volunteers, we staff up. We try to get about double the staffing because we know it's going to be more than double the busy day as a typical day. Although yesterday with the heat, we doubled our normal calls. Our average is about 30 calls for service per day out of the 4 stations. And yesterday we did 60 calls. Many of them were heat related. And we'll talk about some of the challenges with the heat. And as Ted talked about, some of the challenges with the heat related, and we were definitely building the airplane as we were flying down the runway, trying to take off. So we had some real challenges since about Friday of last week. But someone had asked me, how do you, actually one of my bosses, one of my elected fire commissioners, like, my grass doesn't seem as brown as it normally is, like in August. How do we know that it's so dry out, or what do we base that it's so dry and there's really a severe extreme danger right now? And so there's actually scientists throughout the state that monitor what's called the fuel moisture level for the 100-hour fuel. So I'm going to geek out a little bit here on fire department stuff, but what that is, it's 1 to 3 inch dry dead fuels. And so they actually measure the moisture content, and anything below 20% moisture content of that size fuel, the 100-hour fuel. They also do it for 1,000-hour fuels. They also do it for grasses. They also do it for others, but they kind of target the 100-hour fuel. And anything below 20% on this side of the mountains is considered high risk for fire. Right now, we're at 8% fuel moisture. We typically don't get below 20% until late August. We start getting nervous around mid-August, late July, early August time frame, because we start getting down to that threshold of 20%. Well, we're already at 8%. And so we are so significantly lower than where we normally are for the 4th of July, or even at the height of the fire season for us, that the risk of a large, what they call a conflagration fire, is extreme. And we're really going into this time frame where it's going to be extreme fire danger, even on this side of the mountains. And then you add any kind of wind, you add any kind of lightning, and then you add thousands or maybe even tens of thousands of sources of ignition with people lighting fireworks off during the 4th of July. And that can be anything as innocent as a sparkler, as a little Roman candle, or I'm trying to think of some of the ones that we kind of think of as safe and sane, and some of the ones that this year are still legal in the unincorporated area. Even those will start these fires. And the problem is the fuel moisture is so low that what happens, the fire spreads so rapidly that we can never get ahead of it. And so on most 4th of Julys, and the joke for a long time around here was summer begins in Seattle on the 5th of July. And it really was true. We kind of had, maybe a little bit of nice weather. 4th of July is kind of iffy. Sometimes it rains, sometimes it's kind of nice. But then on the 5th, it really starts getting nice for the rest of summer. Well, we started earlier this year. And so we haven't had, any rain, significant rain for weeks. And so what happens is, where we would normally be able to get those fires out when they're very small, what we call the incipient stages, maybe they're a little, 5x5 grass fire, a 10x10 grass fire. These, by the time someone notices them, calls 911, we're able to get there. They go from, you see it at 10x10, we get there, it's 100x100. By the time we get enough resources there, it's 1,000x1,000. We've got multiple houses involved. And so we're always playing catch up. And that's where we get these conflagrations that we've seen in other communities, where entire communities can get wiped out. I don't want to be doom and gloom and talk, the end is near, but there is a real risk that we're going into where we could lose multiple houses. 2 years ago, we lost 2 houses to a fireworks related in the unincorporated and had a fatality. And the risk is real, and it's extremely heightened this year. So as Ted said, fireworks are illegal in the city of Burien. They're not in the city of Norney Park. They're not in the unincorporated. So we have that challenge of different jurisdictions, but they're just as dangerous in any community, especially this year. And we're working, with any group that we can to get that message out that we know we're coming out of COVID. We know in the unincorporated areas that this is the last year that they're legal. And we're just imploring people, please don't light fireworks off this year. We are going to have significant problems I'm sorry, I got distracted by the question in the
Don't worry. We'll have time to get to the question.
I'll circle back. I saw
Yeah, circle back.
pop up. And so we're just really imploring people, please don't light fireworks this year. There really are thousands or tens of thousands of opportunities to ignite those fires. And we are already so busy. And as Ted pointed out, as much as we want to focus on the fireworks, trying to educate, trying to get people not to do them, those are also the days that we're dealing with our normal heart attacks. We're dealing with our strokes. We're dealing with other car accidents. Hopefully not, but I can remember a couple of years ago, we started out with a shooting at about 8 o'clock in the morning down First Avenue, a running gun battle with about 3 or 4 patients. So, our day doesn't focus on just fire. We have our normal shenanigans that are going on in the community that we have to deal with. So I'll answer all your questions about that, anything fireworks related that you want me to. We do up staff. We try to double our staffing on that day. And we're just really asking everyone in the community, please help this year and not light those fireworks. As far as heat related, certainly in all of our minds, just what we got through with those record-breaking temperatures where we just crushed all of the heat records the last 3 or 4 days. Our heat-related illness calls have skyrocketed. There again, we doubled our call volume yesterday. Many of those were heat related. And unfortunately, those are a lot of deaths. There are a lot of deaths in our community. There's a lot of deaths in what we listen to, which is South King County. All the fire districts in South King County are dispatched by the same Valleycom agency. So we hear all of those calls. We see them on our CAD computers. We're going to many CPRs. We're going to many people that have passed away because of heat related and are found by loved ones, typically elderly, underlying health issues and those kind of things. But it affects all of us. We had a fire Sunday night. When I was done at that fire scene on Sunday, I was just spent. I mean, I had a booming headache, thirsty, exhausted beyond what I should have been for the amount of work I do, which is not a lot at fires. And so clearly, those early signs of heat exhaustion and dehydration. So, drink lots of water, stay cool, try to stay out of the sun, don't go outside during the day. And certainly, I think these are the messages that we're going to have to continue to develop, and along with all of our other safety messages, start getting those out into the communities earlier, working with the city, the police, social services to have the cooling shelters available. We displaced about 4 residents of the apartment building because of the fire, and because of all the heat, because of all the people that were going to hotels to get air-conditioned rooms. We had a hard time working with Red Cross, or Red Cross was having difficulty finding available rooms for our displaced fire victims. And so we actually worked with King County and the homeless shelter the COVID homeless shelter that they were opening up on 112th. They offered us up 4 rooms for our displaced people. So we were actively looking, and that was a real challenge for us. The other ones, and I'm sorry, we got a house fire that's going on, so you may hear some tones in the background because I'm still at work. The other thing I want to talk about is just that overall heat and what to kind of look at. Certainly I talked about the dehydration. You got to drink, and just really hydrate. A lot of them were calls that we've been seeing are the core body temperature, where we're going, especially with the elderly or the homebound, where they're just not drinking enough and their overall dehydration goes down and their core body temperature is going up. And we've seen in the last couple of days some of the highest core body temperature patients that I've ever heard of. And so we have adults with core body temperatures in the 105, 106 range, which is not sustainable and leads to death at that rate. So, and unfortunately, as the body temperature goes up, they tend to lose more fluids through evaporation. They're not drinking enough, and it's kind of a vicious cycle. So you really got to keep ahead of the hydration. Certainly fatigue. We've actually had a lot of calls where and I certainly felt that, like I said, on Sunday, you get fatigue, weakness, and we see a lot of falls. We're having a lot of elderly. They're weakened because of the extreme heat, the dehydration, elevated body temperature, and they're falling and they're causing secondary injuries. So things to think about, certainly help people in our community. If you know loved ones, if you have people that live around you that have health needs or elderly, try to help them with those kind of things. Try to hydrate, get lots of rest, don't work outside, look at cooling centers, cool towels, cool baths or showers, anything to try to reduce that core body temperature. The other thing that we found is we're getting a lot of respiratory calls. And if anyone's been up early in the morning, you look outside, beautiful red sunrises or beautiful red sunsets, it's pretty stagnant air right now. And they're not from fires. And that usually comes later in the summer where we start having those air quality issues because of fires. But this is actually air quality has degraded just because of the inversion and then just all the pollutants. They're just sticking around. They're not being the normal pushed away or rained out and cleaned. And so we're seeing a lot of respiratory distress. And there again, people with asthma, COPD, any kind of respiratory, you get that extra burden on your respiratory because of the pollutants. And then there again, all of those things kind of trigger those secondary respiratory calls for us. We also have, we haven't locally, but we've been participating through mutual aid. We've had a lot of cold water calls. Most of them have been in the Green River, but several other lakes. So far, we haven't had any. We do quite a bit of shoreline on the Sound. We have surface water rescue swimmers. We also have Lake Burien. We have Arrow Lake. We do a lot of mutual aid with SeaTac over at Angle Lake. So they get a lot of calls there. So there's very early in the season, the water is still very cold, and we've had a tremendous increase in the number of drownings and near drownings that we've helped with. Like I said, we haven't had any here. We've also got a couple lakes up in the unincorporated area that we go to. So hospital capacity, that's another one that we're struggling with. Every day we look online and we know it's called divert, and that's where a hospital is at capacity and they are no longer accepting patients from us. And so we have to divert, or their ambulance crew will have to divert. And so Valley Medical was on divert for ALS, which is the most acute ill people, and that's advanced life support. That's our paramedics. The basic life support, they said they're about 1 or 2 patients away from being on divert that. St. Anne's Highline here was, they're about 1 or 2 patients today being away from divert. And what that happens to us, instead of being able to take our either ALS or BLS patients to a local hospital, they're having to be sent downtown, or they're having to be sent to Federal Way or Auburn. And so that increases our out of service time as those transports, or as we're waiting for those transports. So talking to our counterparts at TriMed Ambulance or some of the other ambulance companies we use, they're saying up to a 4-hour delay for them to drop a patient off at an ER the last couple of days. So the hospitals are swamped. We're taking them a lot of patients. People are coming in off the streets, going to the ERs. And so they're very swamped right now. The other thing that causes, if our rig is out of service dealing with that patient, we're seeing a lot of this. We're getting either mutual aid, or we're doing what's called our 2nd or 3rd or 4th deep in the run card. So normally we have a general response area for each station, and they somewhat overlap, but we go from the closest fire station to the call. And what we're finding is, like if we're in downtown Burien, all of our rigs are out of service, we may have to pull our fire engine from Normandy Park Station, or we may have to pull from the unincorporated, or we may even have to pull from SeaTac or Tukwila, and vice versa. We were in Renton for a river rescue at the same time that our apartment fire came in on Sunday. So everyone is swamped right now, a lot of moving parts, and we just deal with it and manage it and move on. But I just want to share those things with you. The last thing, I'll certainly answer any questions, but I can talk about COVID and what we've been through, our vaccination program, mobile vaccination that we've been doing that's kind of ramping down. the testing that we were involved with, and then any other fire department questions that you want to know. So with that.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you so much. We'll start first with the fireworks. So,
Sure.
you know, as a member of the Cove, there's lots of fireworks that people typically, you know, will set off, you know, just at the beach at the Cove. Are you also saying that we shouldn't set fireworks off at the Cove in Normandy Park? No fireworks. It's just better to be safe this year because the fire danger is so high. If you could just kind of elaborate on, even if fireworks are legal and it's safe and you're close to the body of water, there's still potential for things to go wrong.
There definitely is. Yeah, that fire danger, you know, that would be my recommendation. That would be my ask of the people, is that we don't. We certainly work, and I'm going to maybe preface it a little bit. This year, I mean, the message is certainly we would like to see no one doing any fireworks. The other issue with the Cove, or even with a lot of other places, and this is where it gets very delicate, I guess, or I'll just say it that way, is you know, there are what's called safe and sane fireworks that are legal in the unincorporated to sell and discharge. Some of those, you know, have a heightened fire danger, but typically they're a lower consumer grade of fireworks. And then you have the next level, which is they're already state illegal, but you can buy them at local Indian reservations, or you can go out of state and buy them, you know. And so there's other ways, and those are certainly a heightened, and I'll just speak as the 16-year-old Mike Mars, and not the fire chief Mike Mars. Those were the cool ones, right? I mean, those are the bottle rockets, those are the Roman candles, those are the big ones, the mortars and those kind of things. Those are the ones that are highly uncontrollable, and honestly, those cause I think probably per capita or per firework more damage, because they go farther, they're bigger boom, bigger fire, less control. I mean, you get a little safe and sane fountain, you put it in the middle of the, you know, huge sandy beach and light it off, and the little showers go up 4 or 5 feet, and it's ooh-ah, and that's about it. But you start shooting mortars hundreds of feet in the air, or they go 100 feet to the right because they fell over, or bottle rockets that are uncontrollable. Those are the ones that are landing on people's shake roofs and starting house fires, or apartment buildings, or dry grass, dry, you know, shrubs, all those kind of things. So I don't want to make a judgment call on the different levels of fireworks, but certainly the ones that you buy at Indian reservations, I think, cause us more problems. In Burien, they're all illegal, and in the unincorporated, even though we try to get that education, we'll be out. We have myself as the fire chief, 2 assistant chiefs, 2 inspectors, and our PIO, all going out along with a lot of people from Ted's group, out trying to do public education. And like I said, we have varying. All of it's illegal in Burien. There are some that are legal in the unincorporated. By and large, it's not the legal ones that are causing us problems in the unincorporated. It's the illegal ones that are statewide illegal, and people either don't want to know, or they just play dumb and they feel like, well, it's legal in the unincorporated area. But there is a very bright line of what's legal and illegal, and we're trying to do that education. Back to your question, my recommendation and my ask is don't do any this year, because it's just too dangerous.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Question from Terry Jorgensen. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Terry. Ask a question.
Hi, we live up in just above Shorewood. But my question really is, can the state or somebody not have some sort of emergency measure? You know, at this situation, it's bad normally, but this is really unusual.
So we are working with the King County Fire Marshal to look at, and the 2 things that the fire marshals group, so individual cities and the unincorporated areas, have a fire marshal group that are responsible for enforcing fire code issues. One of those is the burn ban and some of the others. So what we're working with, and as you know, the 4th is on Sunday, so we're kind of scrambling. There is a push either to ban all sales, which seems to be politically a big lift at this time. There doesn't seem to be a lot of political will to want to shut down all of the stands last minute to sell. And so we're trying to push, and the fire marshal's group is trying to, for an emergency declaration to ban the discharge everywhere. Now realize it's already banned in Burien, and Ted will say, I mean, it's been banned for several years now, and it's still, there are fireworks that go off, and both police and fire are out there trying to curtail it as much as possible. But just because it's banned, you still have to have the resources to enforce it, and it's very, very difficult to enforce it. So we're trying to get an emergency ban, either the sale or the discharge or both. I don't think there's going to be a last minute ban on the sale. We're hopeful that we can get a fire safety ban, but then the second part of that is, how are we going to enforce it? How do we get around to literally thousands of people that are lighting off fireworks just in our community, let alone the tens of thousands throughout the county and the state? So it's just, it's a huge problem. I appreciate what you're saying, though.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Perfect, thanks. One question in the chat, again, just responding to the 30-year fire danger. Should we be watering every day between now, and the 4th, just trying to be, proactive? If, that little 10 by 10 piece of our lawn doesn't catch on fire, we can help mitigate somewhat.
Yeah, I do at home. I set the sprinkler up going into the 4th, and I leave it running on the 4th. I'm away on the 4th most of the times, but my neighbors, I live in the city of Des Moines, they're illegal there. My neighbors don't recognize the ban. And I'll actually put a sprinkler up on my roof too. And I have a shake roof, but I've seen way too many bottle rockets go into a gutter and start the eaves on fire and either burn an entire roof or entire house down. So certainly anything you can do to minimize the fire getting started and getting ahead is helpful. So, we're in severe drought conditions almost everywhere in the state, except for in the Cascades. We had above average snowfall. They're not at this point telling us not to water our lawns, not to conserve water. I'm pretty sure I'm not giving out bad advice there. And so we have good snowpack. And I think for a one day, I think I would let it run. Definitely.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Another question in the chat related to the issue of the cooling centers. We did have cooling centers in our community, and Chief Bo, I think you mentioned, one was at the Burien Community Center. We had another one in the lobby of, the library, City Hall. The police station was also a cooling center. So we did create cooling centers, and now we just have to figure out what our plan is to move forward. And did I capture that correctly? Okay, perfect. I'm seeing nods. Fantastic. All right, next question in the chat. You talked, Chief Mars, about Independence Day being all hands on deck for the fire department, and thank you so much for that. Beyond responding to the emergency calls in the advanced education, could you maybe talk a little bit more specifically about what your proactive response is? And this might be for you too, Chief Bo, in terms of, are you actively patrolling neighborhoods, looking for people that are illegally discharging fireworks? And if so, the Seahurst neighborhood apparently is a hot spot for some illegal firework activity. And again, thank you for all your work.
Yeah, so we proactively, and it's pretty easy. You just drive around with your window down and you hear them going off. There again, they're not legal anywhere in the state, but you hear the firecrackers, you hear the bottle rockets, you see some of the effects, during the daylight. And so we have a little one-page educational For Burien, it's fireworks are illegal. You can't own them, you can't possess them, you can't discharge them, can't sell them, whatever else. And so we just, don't do it. So after we do that, and we have repeat customers. We can literally, I have been shot at with bottle rockets as we're putting out a house fire. And so it gets a little crazy. But as we drive around and we will make contact with people and, in the best friendly manner that we can, try to educate. After that, we hand it off to police. And so we just, hey, would you guys go by, look at this? We talked to these people or this general area, and we went through again, and they're still lighting them off. And so we'll hand those off up until a point, and it kind of varies every year. But we will go out until such time as we just start getting run ragged, and it's just kind of choreographed mayhem for about 3 or 4 hours, depending on how the night is going. But we are literally going from fire to fire to fire, and then we throw in a few other miscellaneous calls. And then we have to do cause and origin investigation. We have to wait for a fire investigator to come out. Especially if it's a larger loss, we'll call in someone from the King County Fire Investigation Unit, or one of our fire investigators need to document that scene. And so we call it sitting on a fire. So we have to sit on a fire. And most of the time that's taking an engine company out of service. They will work with the fire investigator. They'll document what caused the fire, what didn't cause the fire, almost more importantly, because if we have to go testify, we have to be able to say, well, the fireworks caused it. We know it's not electrical. Here's why. We know it isn't smoking. Here's why. We know it's not all these other things. This is the only thing it could be. Here's where it started. Here's the documentation. And we have to be able to testify to that. And so it's a fairly long process. Multiply that by dozens of fires. We have to start figuring out what's the most important ones to do. What are the bigger losses? And then typically where we, on a normal fire, we leave the engine company there to help overhaul. What we're doing now is we're taking the fire chief, the assistant chiefs, our inspectors, and we're sitting on those so the engine company can respond to the next one. And so at that point, we're really taken away from the proactive that we're trying to do. And we just go into a reactionary mode where we're just responding to calls somewhere between 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, it slows down. But we're just in a reactionary mode at that point. And we just have to triage the calls, do the best we can with the resources, put the fires out, because that's the most important, document the ones that we think need the best documentation. If it's just another set of bushes that are on fire and it's the 30th of the night, sorry, you'll probably get a picture taken. It'll be documented that there was a fire most likely caused, and we'll move on to the next one. So I don't know if that totally answers the question. So we start off proactive. This year, we've got the biggest proactive team we have, and we'll be out all day trying to make contact with people. Mix in a little alcohol, and we tend to turn those over to the police earlier. Not everyone likes, even the fire department, coming up and telling them not to do their fireworks. And so we tend to back off those and hand those over to the police.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I think that what strikes me about, both of the presentations is that, prevention is so important, being proactive, whether we're talking about crime, we're talking about fire danger, public safety really starts with a active prevention model, and that takes the whole community working in connection and in collaboration. And how important it is just for us to continue to engage with each other and help each other out. I know when we did a presentation with the National Guard, they said the number one thing you can do to prevent a disaster or for your disaster response is to know your neighbors, right? So that you can check on them, when it's hot outside, right? When there's something happening that doesn't look right or seems off, right? That the people in your community, in your neighborhood, the people that you're doing business next to, that those relationships are vital to maintaining public safety, and prevention is huge. So again, really, really appreciate you both being here. I'll just do one last call for questions before we wrap up. And I put some information into the chat about the chamber. how we're hoping to continue to convene these community roundtables for the Burien and White Center community, and any ideas for future topics. Chief Bo, sounds like you're doing a presentation to the council in July, so you'll have some solutions that hopefully the business community can, help you implement. And we just look forward to being and continuing to be a partner to keep our community safe. Public safety is economic development, and economic development and public safety, all team sports. So again, appreciate everybody being here. Stay safe, water your lawn, drink water. Water. Bye, everybody.